Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We will just wait a minute or two, make sure all of our attendees can come in, and then we will get started. Hey, well, welcome everybody to our final webinar of the Coffee Market Trends webinar series. This webinar is about trends in the valuing and pricing of coffee, and this webinar is held as part of the Chain Collaborative's Alumni Network initiative in collaboration with Coffee Knowledge Hub. So today we have captions, translated captions. And so to find the captions, just please navigate to the bottom of your screen. You'll see that there's a icon that says CC, Show Captions. So click that arrow here and then slide over the translation button, and then you can choose the language that you want to read the captions in. Bienvenidos a todos a este seminario web. Este seminario web cuenta con subtítulos. Entonces, para encontrar los subtítulos, pueden ver abajo de su pantalla hay algo que dice Show Captions. Entonces, hace clic ahí y después puedes ver que dice translación y vas a también hacer clic ahí y buscar su idioma para escuchar. Entonces, yeah, thank you. So I will first introduce the Chain Collaborative, and then I will introduce the webinar again and our speakers. So the Chain Collaborative is an organization in the coffee sector, and our mission is to co-create opportunities and strengthen capacities for community-led change. We firmly believe that coffee communities make the best decisions about their own development, and that true sustainable change comes from the visions of local leaders and local leadership. So through our community-led development incubator program, we support communities' visions, and we invest in their leaders to design, carry out, and measure the impact of their own programs. And this allows beneficiaries to remain at the helm of their own initiatives and to define and create livelihood developments on their own terms. As after the incubator program, we have our participants join the alumni network, which is essentially what it sounds like, a remote network for past incubator participants to continue working and learning together. And one of the things that we do as part of the alumni network is host learning opportunities and webinars for alumni as well as for others in the coffee sector. And so this year, alumni mentioned wanting to learn more about how to read market trends. So we developed this Market Trends webinar series. This is the third of 3 webinars. The other webinars were launched in the past weeks, and they are Trends in Green Coffee Processing and Production, Trends in Coffee Roasting and Consumption, and both of these webinars are available on our YouTube channel. They're also available on Coffee Knowledge Hub, who has partnered with us to spread the word about this webinar and the other webinars as well. So I'm very excited to be with 4 amazing speakers today. We have Ingrid Gasser, CFO and Head of Exports at Camila Khalifé. We have Kenneth Barigye, Managing Director of Mountain Harvest in Uganda. Brendan Adams, founder of Sumia Coffee in Canada and TCC's own The Chain Collaborative. She's the Impact and Communications lead here, and she also is a CVA instructor and does a number of things in Ecuador and throughout the world, focused on many other important aspects of the coffee industry. So really excited to have everybody here, and I will stop sharing now so that you can see all of us, and we'll move into the questions. Just give me 1 second. And also, please, if you have questions for our panelists, please put those in the Q&A, and we will have 10 to 15 minutes at the end to answer those questions. So without further ado, I will start with the first question, which is for Kenneth. And that is, from your perspective, who gets to define what value means in coffee today? And how do you think that definition can become more collective and inclusive?
Thank you. Thank you, Nora. Good evening from Uganda. It's an honor and pleasure to be on this webinar. I'm excited to connect with so many people all over the world. And thank you for your important question, Nora. From my perspective, the question of who defines value in coffee today is still largely shaped by actors who are far removed from where coffee is produced. In practice, value is defined by the commodity market, by the traders and financial institutions who respond to risk speculation and the global supply and the dynamics of demand. The C price becomes the anchor at the end of the day for almost every transaction in the coffee business, even in specialty coffee, despite being disconnected from the social and environmental realities in producing countries like Uganda. So today, to me, value is defined through a lens that prioritizes market efficiency, that prioritizes liquidity and risk management, not the lived experience of the farmers who toil every day or the cost of sustainable production. It is defined by those who can participate comfortably in volatility because they do have the resources and the knowledge to participate in that, not by those who bear the consequences of that volatility. And because of this, value becomes, in my opinion, something imposed on farmers rather than something emerging from their context, from their labor, or from their investment. But I think it's time we shift the conversation from asking who defines value to actually ask who should define value. For value to be meaningful, it must be shaped collectively by all the actors in the value chain. Remember, there is a reason we call it a value chain. It's a chain. It brings together a number of pieces with the farmers, cooperatives, local exporters, and all the producing country institutions having a central voice rather than a voice that is on the periphery. And there are a few steps that I believe can help us move in that direction, given the experience of Mountain Harvest. First, I think we need to root value in the true cost of quality and sustainable production. Today, pricing rarely reflects what it actually costs to grow the coffee in a way that builds resilience, that protects ecosystems, or supports dignified livelihoods. When a farmer invests, for example, in organic farming or climate-smart practices, those contributions are invisible in the current commodity reference system. In Uganda, for example, Mountain Harvest is working with farmers who practice organic farming and regenerative farming, not because it is fashionable, but because we see the benefit it has, the long-term benefit for productivity and resilience. Yet, when you look at the current pricing system, those values are not recognized in the C price. If we want inclusive value, therefore, we need benchmarks built around these real costs at origin. The second, we need value systems that look beyond CAP score. CAP quality is important, we all agree, but is only one dimension of value. A coffee can score 86 points and still comes from a community where farmers are being paid below production cost, where women laborers are not paid, where soils are degraded. Meanwhile, a farmer who produces an 82-point coffee using organic practices may be contributing much more in the long term to a value for the sector. But right now, that contribution is not priced in. This is why tools like the new CVA are interesting. They attempt to expand the idea of that value beyond flavor. But of course, CVA will matter only if buyers are willing to pay beyond the reference point. It cannot remain a scoring exercise. It must be a pricing conversation. Third, value must be co-created through long-term relationships. Short-term buying reinforces imbalances because the person who is producing is never sure whether they will actually find the market at what price. When buyers commit to mightier relationships, especially with transparent cost breakdowns and shared risk arrangements, it becomes possible to create value collectively. And fourth, I do believe that true inclusivity requires shifting who provides the information. Value today is often determined by data coming from the consuming countries. So you're talking about scores, trends, sustainability claims. But accurate cost data, the climate risk data, the labor data, these must come from producing countries. And those who generate the data must also be helped to interpret it. So we need to build an origin-led benchmark that reflects the cost of climate adaptation, the social values of women's labor, the cost of soil regeneration, the economic risk of farmers, like all of that. So today, as I conclude, Enola, value is defined by those who hold the power in the global system. For tomorrow, value must be defined with farmers. I'm not saying by farmers, with farmers, based on real costs, on real risks, and real contributions to climate resilience, community well-being, quality, all the things that we claim to care about. To get there, we need transparency, shared data, long-term relationships, and pricing structures that reflect what truly takes to grow sustainable coffees, not just what the future markets dictates. And if we can achieve that, then value becomes something shared, not extracted. It becomes a tool for equity, not a byproduct of speculation. And the entire sector would become stronger because the foundation of value finally reflects the people and landscapes that make coffee possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was amazing. I think we could such a perfect description of what needs to happen that we could almost end there, but thankfully we have more time to discuss. And so yeah, I want to turn now to Ingrid and pick up on this concept of kind of the producer-led definitions of value. And so Ingrid, what else do you think we have to keep in mind in order for price setting to truly come from farmers and begin in producing countries?
I think, and that this connects with what Kenneth said, actually, that we really need to recognize that prices and even costs are different in every country. But additional to production cost, I think it's important to think about debt, because interest rate in every country are different, and the cost of the money is pretty different in producing countries, and that impact directly in the cost of producing coffee. On top of that, I think in concept that's transparency or traceability have to change. We need to evolve what we understand in this concept. Right now, I think they mostly one way. We sometimes show only the price that is paid to the farmer, and not even always, but the producer doesn't see what happens in the other side. If we could map like how value is actually distributed in the value chain, then we can have more open and fair conversations. And those conversations will directly influence on how coffee is valued. Once value distribution maybe is visible, it's become easier to negotiate and to design a price that is truly farmer-led, I think. Additional, I think that it's very important to have more processes that are born and in communities, like community-led process or based process to setting price. I think it's a better way to create a negotiation and safe conversation about price. We still need to make an initial offer because when you ask like, what price would you like, it's like too abstract, and I think like a little bit irresponsible. And that's very open-ended. So making an offer, and together with the community, construct a price. And after that, make all your financial scheme. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I think this concept of reimagining how we understand transparency and traceability is really important. And I'm wondering, Brendan, what else? I know that you had talked about this yesterday, and kind of, what else you wish people would pay attention to in terms of transparency. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, as well as how you think these sort of global dynamics and reference systems that we have currently are really divorced from local realities, even in markets that, claim to do better.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Nora. And yes, like Kenneth said, so glad to be here. And thanks everyone for attending. Yeah, I think that one big point of transparency obviously has been to generate value, quote unquote, to on a specialty context, of course, we came up with the idea that if we had traceability and transparency to the farm, we could therefore theoretically generate more value for the producer or for the importer or the roaster by suggesting that we'd done more work or had passed more value down the supply chain. I would argue, though, something that's sort of developed in that process is we've developed a bit of a adaptation, we could say, where we can provide now farm gate prices, potentially for sure FOB prices, photos of farmers, and these things are quite standard. You can get those very easily at any stage of the supply chain. However, it's sort of stopping there, right? And so while that might seem like it's satisfactory, what can happen and what we see is happening a lot on the actual supply side in producing communities is how that lack of downstream information beyond the person who garners that FOB price is actually very interesting and can have very detrimental downstream effects, regardless of whether that person sold you an 86-point pink bourbon coffee from a traceable farm. So I think that what we really need to be looking at in that case is what is happening now in an industry where not only has the coffee price gone up, but also the costs have been elevated since the global pandemic and before then, but specifically since the pandemic when we saw fertilizer costs shoot through the roof, and a variety of other costs, including land costs to acquire land. What does it mean now when you start to see a way that local actors are finding the way to market themselves, to achieve quality, and to enter a specialty market in such a way that meets the standards of the roaster and the importer and even the exporter, which is just this basic information of a producer's photo, traceability, and of course the quality score that's necessary ideally too for people, fun varieties, crazy processes, these kind of things then enter them into the market and they tend to corner the market. And we see more and more of these scenarios where individuals are taking up a lot of space for an entire country, and we don't actually think much deeper about what's going beyond the cup, as it were, right? What's happening beyond this producer. And so I think we really need to be thinking a lot deeper about the community impacts of specialty coffee, right? What is it when we just start buying from one producer? This is something that's been demonstrated by, Ted Fisher and his work on Cup of Excellence. When you start to separate off one person by cup quality, you get one individual in a community that benefits greatly, that gets massive market access, that acquires more land, that has way higher sale price, and all of their neighbors do not see the same benefit, right? And I think this has been something that we've been very engaged in from the beginning, is that there has to be a definition, as you mentioned at the beginning with Chain Collaborative, community-led decisions, of course, but also community-led impact, that buying can't be just about the one individual who hits all of the check marks. It has to be making sure that the whole community rises, right? And if we don't do that, the unintended consequences of that are that we potentially lend ourselves into a scenario where specialty coffee starts to replicate conventional dynamics. Producers who are able to provide high quality coffee have to get their hands on more cherry to meet the demand and therefore begin buying that cherry at a conventional price. This is not uncommon that many specialty actors are selling differentiated prices on an FOB price, but paid a conventional price or even less potentially, depending on the year, in order to procure that for the roaster and the importer. And we don't think deeply about whether or not that's there because we have the data sort of quote unquote, of the value that has made it worth it, right? So I think that what this means for us as people who are fundamentally the most focused on smallholders and peripheral producers, that is, producers that have the raw material and the least aggregate value within the supply chain, what happens to them in that model of specialty coffee? Are we seeing a consolidation of power then that is affecting not just, roasters and importers and exporters, but also producers, where producers are beginning to consolidate more power than in certain areas than the general aggregate, and what is affecting the people who hold up the entire supply chain in that scenario, and how does specialty actually add value to them? So I think that community-led approach and going beyond as close as we can to the cherry, not just the exportable green coffee, is what becomes incumbent upon us at this point in 2025. With all of this, the knowledge that we have to push further on transparency to make sure that that value is really reaching the person that we want it to and is being defined by them as well.
Thanks, Brendan. Yeah, this conversation is so interesting to me. I think what I'm like swimming around in my head a lot from what all of you said is the need to, well, the community-led approach, of course, to coffee pricing. You've mentioned, of course, really basing price on local realities. Things like debt that farmers have, land prices, right? Things we don't often hear about when we have this sort of conversation about pricing. And then what is the kind of impact that we're really hoping for? So Kenneth, you mentioned basing kind of price on the sort of the cost of that community impact, whether it's social, environmental. But then Brendan, you're also talking about really understanding what that impact is on sort of a deeper level. So and of course, throughout all of this, something I think all three of you have said is this term, like, go beyond the cup. So let's ask Camila now, sort of what is this challenge that we have of going beyond the cup and going beyond the quality score? Really, so much of even being able to have a differentiated price does depend on quality. So I'd love for you to talk about this structural element of coffee pricing and how it relates to value now, or how it could or should relate to value going forward.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you everyone for your valuable input. Yeah, I think the specialty coffee challenge is one that we kind of created ourselves in this industry, where we tied these differentials or these premiums to cup quality, to cup flavor, right? So it was like, if you produce better coffee, you will access better prices. And there are a couple issues with that premise. First, I think we kind of created this division between those who produce like lower quality, kind of like creating this idea that coffee is easy to produce, or that those producers are not putting enough effort or enough work, right? And coffee, even the most basic coffee, is a really, really challenging agricultural product. It's a very hard crop. Like, not even, I won't say what score, but not even whatever coffee you consider the most basic is easy to produce. It's a very delicate, hard risk crop. And so with this specialty coffee idea, we kind of created the idea that, okay, conventional or commercial coffee is just like easy and cheap, sort of say, and it's not cheap. And like, there's not one coffee in the world that's cheap to produce. It's not a cheap product. So even like when we tie prices to quality and those differentials that can be depending on the price of coffee, right? Because it's tied to the C price. When the C price is low, that differential can be, I don't know, 50% more than the C price, 60, whatever, 100% more. And it can be still less than the cost of production, right? Because we are not considering anything but a price that is tied not to local realities. The C price has nothing to do with what producers are going through, to like their inputs, their effort, what they are putting into coffee. It's more related to global economic dynamics, can be tied to whatever, the price of oil, whatever. So even in the specialty coffee industry, we are tied to things far from the local realities. That's one thing. Then the other thing is that this idea of quality, that is basically a sensory perception of flavors, of aromas. For long, we thought, or we were replicating this speech that it's universal, that everyone sort of appreciates or values the same attributes in coffee, right? So it's like the premise was like quality is achievable and it's this, right? It's here. So if you work, you will get there. But we are seeing coffee being produced in so many different regions with so many different weathers, different varieties, different species, and we are never going to achieve this same product that we consider of high quality. So I think it was time, and I'm glad like the SCA with the CBA and with many, many conversations that are happening, we are now at least starting to acknowledge that quality and flavor and valuing specific flavors is not universal. We come from different cultures, from different backgrounds, and we are going to value different things in coffee. Like even if we talk just about the cup, and this is considered normal and common with any other food product, right? We are not all expected to like the same soda or the same wine or the same beer or the same pizza, whatever, you know? We acknowledge that everyone has different tastes. So I think it's important that we start acknowledging that, and that different profiles deserve to be paid, right? Not only those who we have like historically considered high value, high quality, but if we have different profiles that come from different species and different varieties and all the conditions that come into place, deserve to be well paid, because as I said, coffee is not easy to produce. And I don't think the CVA is like the ultimate solution for this very, very complex thing we are talking about. But I think it's a start. As Kenneth said, it's at least we are moving towards a more holistic way of valuing coffee. And we are acknowledging that first, not everyone appreciates the same in the cup. And then that there are other things outside the cup that we need to start putting value and putting a price to. All the extrinsic attributes that we see in coffee, they have a cost and they have a price, and they should be valued by markets. So yeah, I think it's a good start. I think we are hopefully going in the right path. I do think it's hard to kind of deconstruct what we've been constructing for a couple of decades, right? Like quality and flavor, and that's what we need to focus on. And now we are trying to deconstruct that idea, but I think at least we are starting, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And you mentioned something that directly relates to my next question, and this, I think there's some questions too in the chat that are coming in as you speak, and so I'll link to some of what you said when we do our Q&A. And for everyone else, please add your questions to the chat as you think of them. But what you mentioned in terms of, growing coffee is not easy no matter what, but it's going to become even harder. Or it is becoming even harder as a result of climate change, which is another huge part of the conversation. So turning back to Brendan, curious, sort of beyond quality, thinking of climate change as another important part of the conversation. How do you think this is shaping our sense of value, if you think it is shaping our sense of value, and what new forms of value might emerge as a result of the conversation on climate change?
Yeah, definitely. I think that like what Camila said about all, the incredible cost of producing coffee, like how the most basic cup of coffee was a very delicate and challenging thing to produce. Climate change is one of those exact factors that is making that even more challenging. And is one that is just very hard to quantify in a value set, in the system of defining value that exists as it is now, right? So for sure, like the CVA, I think is a nice, at least as long as at least as like a symbolic value of like, you know, we're trying to think outside the box. I think all of us agree that it's still a first iteration. There's a lot of work to do, but you know, the notion that we're trying to like poke outside of just like what ends up on a cupping table and what you decide it tastes like as a person who's seeking a Panama coffee out of every single coffee that you taste in the world. Um, you know, I think it's really challenging because I think that the reality is that you'll never taste climate change in the cup, right? And in fact, when you do, you'll probably say the coffee isn't good. And then that's really one of those questions of like where we almost have to look at that way that reverse of looking for the best cup quality and buying that. You know, there's a way in which work should be started by finding the less good coffee and asking why isn't it that good and what could be achieved from that, from looking deeper into the product behind it, right? I think that people that we work with, many people that we work with, you know, they explicitly say to us things that like they deserve more money and they need more money, just not even deserve, but just on a basic standard of living when their costs go up because they have to put more into their soil, they have to do more fertilization, they have to do more chemical input just to survive. But then beyond that, they're getting lower yields and they're dealing with massive crop loss. It just is a matter of fact that like even an 82 point coffee, if you only get, you know, half out of your hectare that you got last year, your cost of production is much higher and the cost of the coffee needs to go up. And so I think that people need to recognize more and more. And sadly, I would say in our world, climate change is becoming, you know, not even a subject that we talk about a lot, but especially in coffee, I think it's being missed a lot. And anybody who's worked closely with coffee producers has always known that they've been very aware of the effect of the climate for at least a decade, if not longer. And now it's the number one preoccupation of everybody that we work with around the world is how are they going to survive based on the climate changing as it is and what's going to be the solution. And this has to be something that our industry is taking very seriously. And it ties to the notion of quality and value. We talked about that yesterday, about what happens when we can't get Arabica anymore. Many places that we work anymore, Honduras, the majority of the country, there is no such thing as heirloom varieties anymore. If you want that, you should be paying triple just for the fact that you got a Bourbon out of Honduras because it costs that much money to produce it, right? So I think that you tie that to the fact as well that many of the people who are struggling against climate change are also land defenders. They're people that put their bodies and their families on the line. They might travel to protest inside a capital like they did in Guatemala a couple of years ago with the attempted coup of the government. You know, they might be stopping illegal logging in their communities, stopping mining projects. How do we quantify value around people who are coffee growers, but they're also protecting the land that they live in and developing resiliency for climate that affects all of us in the globe, right? And so I think that I don't necessarily have an answer to that, but I think one thing we can't see is or believe that science or some sort of big scale solution is going to solve that. You know, there's been attempts at geoengineering. And just a couple days ago, they released information that was saying there is no level of geoengineering that will save crops like wine, coffee, or cacao because it's just not possible. And so there's a fundamental shift already underway about what is possible out of quality in many places in the world. Quality potentials are going to drop in many places in the world, and there already is a need to shift to Robusta and other types of varieties that are more disease resistant. And we're going to have to recognize a new value set for that. And we're also going to have to come to terms with the fact that lowered quality doesn't mean that we can suggest that it's worth less money by any means. In fact, a higher understanding of cost is really crucial. And this is why we can't just be looking at FOB versus C market, right? If you just say, oh, well, now we paid $4.50 and the market was $3.20, it's just actually totally irrelevant. It becomes totally irrelevant. And so I think we need to be thinking a lot more holistically about what that is affecting the cup and how we can be engaged as buyers and understanding how we create collaborative solutions around that, right? So I think there's a lot of things that can be done, varietal projects, nurseries, soil analysis. There's little locally based approaches that can be taken, but it requires buy-in and it requires being connected with the people that you work with and understanding their challenges and finding collaborative solutions to them.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, just listening to all of this, I think one of the reasons probably we don't talk about climate change enough is because it's pretty dire situation, as you've, pointed out. And I think as all of you have shared, You know, when we truly take something like climate change into account, you know, like the question becomes, is the true price of that beyond what people are willing to pay? And then we have everything sort of linked to quality, and to really take this into account, we have to de-link, you know, pricing from quality, which is something that we haven't done, you know, in the industry. And it's really hard to quantify things that you've mentioned, like being a land defender. I mean, it's huge, right? But how do you quantify that? You mentioned some, you know, positive things we could do towards the end. Ingrid, kind of picking up on that, I'd like to hear what types of, you know, structural changes you think would be necessary to ensure that, you know, prices do translate into better livelihoods, more care for the planet, in light of climate change, in light of, you know, all of these challenges we've been talking about.
What is interesting about the question is that maybe we don't have the answer, or there is no one answer. So if we make a list, maybe it's an endless list of like things we can do, or maybe we aim to do. But I think that I want to choose one because under these pressures like climate change and increasing quality, we need to share more risk with producers. Right now, most of the climate risk, quality risk, market risk is at farm level. So I think that's not sustainable. And even more serious, because we are requiring that to them. We are requiring more quality. And the rest of the value chain has to assume part of that risk. I think that means many things. But one of them, I think, is to have more risk-sharing instruments, like, as we say, community-led process or another type of instruments. And we have already seen some programs in Mexico that show a promising like shift, and is using parametric climate insurance. Because the risk here is not left only in the village, in the farm, to the producer, but transferred back to the financial market. So I think it's reconduced where it can actually be absorbed, not only for the producer. I think that's like something like making something interesting. But I think more important is like to have like commercial vouchers or innovation vouchers, like for roasters. Because if you want, as a roaster or coffee shop, to experiment a variety, a process, you have to pre-commit with that coffee. Because in other way, the farmer is financing your R&D. So I think it's very important to keep in mind that things. And this includes ensuring farmers to have economic alternative, as they are not just coffee farmers. There are persons, there are like multi-layer as all of us. And sometimes other crops have more value for them, like in time, in rituals, in habits, right? So I think it's very important to ensure the economic alternative, because it's like a big, it's very important to have more power in the market. So, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really tying back to one of the things we talked about in the first webinar, which was about risk sharing, and we talked about risk sharing in terms of processing and experimentation, and so you're calling back to that discussion. So that's really nice, and I think it's also very valuable what you're sharing about economic alternatives. And you know, coffee farmers are not just coffee farmers, right? They grow other crops, and this is another thing to keep in mind when we price coffee and think about climate change, because more and more, this part of the solution is economic alternatives, so that we're not just, you know, just relying, farms don't just rely on one crop in light of climate change. And so, yeah, this is a lot of structural change. You've mentioned some positives with kind of insurance. And so, yeah, asking Kenneth kind of a similar question. What do you think the kind of current climate around pricing? So just, yeah, the current pricing dynamics, what do you think, you know, do you see that structural change is possible? And you know, why or why not? What are you seeing around the possibility of structural change?
Thank you, Nora. I think we have seen that it is possible. The current pricing climate is revealing something very important. It's showing us the possibility of structural change in coffee. Of course, it is a mixture of both opportunity and a warning. On one hand, we are in a moment where global prices have risen to levels that many producing countries have not seen in years. Some prices in a country like Uganda, we've never seen them. It's the first time. Farmers who have historically operated at margins are finally seeing, or even below margins, are finally seeing prices that allow them to meet basic needs without asking buyers for more. For the first time, I started my coffee journey in 2017. For the first time, the farmers are saying the price is good. And this is significant. For the first time, we are seeing that buyers can pay more when market conditions force them. That alone, to me, Nora and everyone on the webinar, exposes a central truth, that the sector has always had more room to pay higher prices. It simply wasn't structurally designed to do so unless the C price pushed it there. So the current pricing climate is proving that higher prices are not only possible, they are actually sustainable. It started last year. When the market has no choice, they are sustainable. The question, therefore, is whether we can maintain that willingness when the C price eventually comes down. And that depends on whether we use this moment to advance structural reforms. First, this moment shows that farmers can influence price if the context shifts. In Uganda, for example, many farmers are not asking for higher prices this year because the price is already much higher than they are used to. Yet what is interesting is that for the first time, some producers are setting their own prices and buyers are adjusting to them. This shift is important. To me, I see how it is showing us that producers have more leverage in tight markets. And we see that buyers can adapt to origin set reference prices. Local companies like Mountain Harvest that support farmers also need margins that reflect their loan. And lastly, supply scarcity will force the market to listen to us from the producing world. So this is a glimpse of what structural change can look like. Origin-led, I was thinking about it as an origin-led price setting. Second, the pricing climate is revealing the limits of quality-based pricing that we've always focused on in specialty coffee. Mountain Harvest is a specialty coffee producing company. In specialty coffee, quality has long been used as the justification for price. But today, even with high quality, the reference point is still the C price. I remember naively when I started saying we want to disconnect from the C price. And as we've seen this year, the C price can quickly outpace what the specialty market is willing to pay for an 84, for an 85-point coffee. And this exposes, in my opinion, a structural contradiction. If the price of an 80-point coffee is close enough to the price of an 86-point coffee, purely because the market is swinging, then quality, we have to admit, is not the real driver of price. It's the market dynamics. And this reinforces the argument that CAP score above, focusing on CAP score is not a sustainable pricing mechanism. The CVA, we're excited about it, could help reframe value, but itself alone, it doesn't automatically shift pricing power. We need pricing frameworks that reflect cost, reflect risk, like Camila was talking about, and resilience, not just sensual attributes. So the current climate is highlighting the fragility of that quality differential system and creating space for more origin-led models. Third, the pricing climate is exposing also power imbalances in a way that is harder to ignore. When prices rise suddenly, like we've seen, everyone downstream looks for ways to protect their margins. We have seen traders consolidating. We've seen a tendency to default of lower quality commodity prices, buyers playing with quality definitions to maintain lower costs, and roasters blending more to manage price shocks, which reveals something structural. The system is designed to protect buyers and not the farmer. Even when the price is high, many buyers are still trying to behave as if it is low, and they are not pushing hard the final consumer to pay more so that we can have more money within, because the most important person is the final consumer. It's the one who is paying for a cup of coffee. So whatever we do to try and keep margins in control without influencing what happens down, then we don't have something sustainable. Now, then fourth, the current climate is showing us that sustainability conversations must be tied to pricing. Otherwise, they're just empty conversations. Many of the coffees that are most vulnerable to climate change talk about high altitude Arabicas, the washed profiles, the delicate varieties that we get excited about are the same coffees the industry say it values the most. Yet, they are also coffees with the highest they are also the coffees with the highest production cost and the climate risk. Therefore, if this pricing climate teaches anything, it is that climate resilience must be priced into the value of coffee. The cost of adaptation, which is carried by the farmers, cannot fall solely on them. It has to be shared by the value chain. The local exporters like Mountain Harvest who are investing in sustainability, they also need margin space. And the living income indicators need to influence actual financial decisions. Finally, the pricing climate, it's also that we are living these days, it's also giving us a chance. Of course, it's not a guarantee, but it's a chance of structure change. If we do nothing, once the C price falls again, the industry will snap back to the old norm. Raw prices, high risk for farmers, and a system driven by speculation rather than partnership. But if we use this moment wisely, I do believe honestly in my inexperience, I've been here for 8 years, I want to believe that we can formalize origin-led benchmarks, we can strengthen long-term contracts, we can adopt pricing models that reflect real cost of production, we can use the opportunity of the new CVA to expand it into pricing conversations, not just value conversations, and we can create mechanisms where risk is shared more fairly across the chain. This year, as I conclude, has shown Nora that structure change is possible because the market has been forced stretch. But lasting change will require making that stretch the new foundation, not a temporary exemption to survive these tough times. Therefore, it is a wake-up call for all of us, and is showing us what is possible when the system shifts, but also reminding us how quickly those gains can disappear if we don't build new structures to sustain them. Thank you.
Yeah. Once again, there's so many sound bites in there that I'd love to kind of reshare. They're also wonderful. For time's sake, we'll go to our last question here for Camila, and I think just in general, kind of your comment on kind of I guess the last comment here on the quality conversation, and kind of responding to what Kenneth said about what's really driving price. Is it quality? Is it the markets? And maybe also to kind of look at some of the questions in the chat around the CVA, how you think that can be used more holistically to have a more holistic sort of conversation about price and value.
Yeah, thank you. I think, well, Kenneth said it all, but I guess just like to complement, I think, it's a crazy time when we have reached like historic highs in the price of coffee, in the C price, right? Because that's the base of it. Specialty coffee is, I think, around 20% of the global coffee market. So it's like not a lot. And yet when prices reach historic highs, we've seen people starting calling it a crisis, which for me is like, it's an issue because it shows how disconnected the specialty coffee industry is from the reality of the world, from the reality of people who produce coffee. to me, coffee has been in crisis since its inception as a crop. It's a problematic crop. It's based on exploitation. It's based on power dynamics and very exploitative practices, even specialty coffee. And like that false illusion that we in specialty have been doing things better. And yes, we have been doing some things better, kind of like prevented us from seeing like these global dynamics and problems and issues. And I'm talking about what Kenneth was mentioning, like the power, where has the power been historically, right? And if this showed us that producing countries can have the power and coffee farmers can have the power, because to be real, they have the coffee. The coffee is theirs, and they should be able to do with the coffee whatever they want. And that's not the reality. But I think this crisis has shown us that we could shift where the power relies. I also want to go back to what Ingrid was saying, and it's like the importance of that freedom to choose what you want to do with your land, with your life, with your time, with your investments. We have seen in TCC, when we work in community-led initiatives, a high percentage of those initiatives are focused on diversifying income, on like looking, okay, what else can we do to thrive, right? Because coffee is not enough, because we have been building an industry on top of farmers' backs, on farmers' needs, and farmers not being able to meet their basic needs. So the moment they are receiving more money and they are able, due to global dynamics, to access better prices, we see the crisis, right? It's like, oh my God, this industry that we have built on top of this exploitation is stumbling, right? It's falling apart. If the crisis is that producers will move away from coffee, maybe that is the crisis, right? They are not seeing enough benefits. Like if the price goes down again, they are not seeing benefits, they are going to stop producing coffee. First, maybe it's because of that, or because climate change won't let them keep producing coffee. Tying to the quality idea, when we only value and appreciate certain flavors and certain attributes in coffee, we are going to see that the varieties and the places that produce those types of coffee are not going to be able to produce them in 30 years or 50 years. So we are going to have to start appreciating other coffees from different regions, from lower altitudes, like the same weather that we see at this altitude, we are going to start seeing here. So we are going to change the way we consume coffee. So I think, yeah, we can learn a lot from this moment. It gives me hope to hear Kenneth saying that structural change is possible. Yeah, I guess I saw a question about like the holistic idea, like what is this? It's basically not focusing only on flavor, right? We've seen people were so excited about capping score and capping notes as long as it was affordable for them, what they considered affordable. When it goes up, it's like, maybe now it's not so important that it's floral or that it's this or that, because we appreciate it as long as it's cheap. And as I said before, it was never cheap. It should have never been cheap. And we should get used to paying more, right? It's like when you don't produce a product, I don't know, where I live, we don't produce olives, we don't produce grapes. Wine is expensive, olive oil is expensive, like nuts are expensive, pistachios are crazy expensive. So why do we assume that coffee has to be cheap where it's not produced, right? That it has to be like accessible and ready to consume. So I think that's like the mental shift we need.
Thank you so much to all of you. And Yeah, we have less time for questions than we had planned. So I will try to get to as many as we can. And for the panelists, if you see a question that you know, could answer, maybe type the answer, that would be great. Yeah, I think I'll direct the first question. I don't know, I think maybe this one might be a good one for Brendan for you to answer. In terms of do you think there's been a change in the current infrastructure in terms of shortening the supply chain? Have we, yeah, I know you have a kind of interesting perspective on like the missing middle, right? So have we shortened the supply chain, or what's happening with that middle right now?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I saw that question. I think it's interesting. I think try to be brief. I think in a lot of scenarios, I think we live in a really interesting space as an importer because so many of the people who would be considered our colleagues are considered middlemen who fundamentally serve as intermediaries. And historically, we have been importer companies have been companies that find the best way to extract the highest quality coffee en masse, maintain the access to that quality, gatekeep it in a way, more or less, and garner their benefit off of that gate-kept relationship. Or people basically have to work with them in order to get the quality they desire, right? I think this has led to like a sense that importers are a fundamentally like corrupt institution, but at the end of the day, importers are necessary roles that exist. Very few people, especially the most peripheral people on the supply chain, will ever be able to export their own coffee directly to a roaster. It's almost impossible for them to do it alone. And there has to be somebody, like was been mentioned here, that shares the risk. And that's been a big part of our work is how do we shorten that supply chain? So it becomes a direct link to a community group of producers and a direct link to a roaster. And we're just in the middle trying to facilitate as much as we can of that buying power and then maintain, as Kenneth mentioned, that long-term relational consistency that makes people realize that like by December, you know that for the rest of the harvest, someone's going to buy your coffee and they're going to buy it at a solid price. And this is what they want and how much they need. And you just need to do your work, right? I think that stuff is like super important. I would say though that sadly with the consolidation that we mentioned, I don't think we're necessarily getting closer to origin. I think a lot of us are sitting on our hands and feeling a little bit overwhelmed by what's happening. Many of us in the specialty industry have the ability to understand more, but get a little bit caught up in the day-to-day maybe, or trapped in like the inability to understand basic things, and then we get stuck in a pattern where certain trends continue to dominate. So I think that what we are seeing now, I would argue, is a little bit more of that push that was mentioned to maintain a low price despite it not being low. So I think a lot of people now are trying to pivot, roasters, importers both, and just corner a supply of coffee that's saleable. So that means get it as cheap as possible so you can guarantee your sale and minimize your risk, right? As the price goes up, this isn't considered good. It's considered a crisis because it's risk. That's fundamentally the scariest thing, right? And for companies that have always been engaged in paying high prices, you were always paying risky, crazy prices. For an industry that never was, suddenly it becomes an outsized sense of risk, and that's a crisis in their eyes because if they get stuck with something, what are they going to do with it? Even though, as Camila had pointed out, that's the whole basis of the coffee supply chain is that one person with not enough resources ends up with an expensive crop they can't sell and sells it for too little. And I think that what sadly we can see happening in this space that we need to fight back against is limiting our high-end quality coffees to smallest amount, highest quality possible, and bulking up on these like commercial level blends and then still selling at a differentiated price. As Kenneth mentioned, the consumer has to be apprised of why costs are higher. And so not only do we need customer production data really drilled in on for the producer so the producer understands what their costs are, roasters need to be communicating to their clients that a small to medium enterprise cannot compete with Starbucks or cannot compete with Luckin. They are forced to produce higher costs, even and if they're paying higher for coffee as well, the coffee is going to cost more money. It's undeniable that people need to recognize and share that down the line, because otherwise we end up with the hollowing of the middle that we're saying, where the bulk of what people produce becomes no longer valuable. And then therefore we're only paying money for the cheapest coffee and the highest end coffee. This is not a sustainable long-term solution for the coffee industry.
Brendan. Well, unfortunately, we do just have 1 minute left. I think what I will do is just kind of share the gist of, I think what I'm seeing through question, the Q&A of a sort of final question and almost like a bit of a warning for us all. I think there's this broad question of, how do we make sure that, value, even going forward, is not just a concept that is still really driven by the kind of the powers that be and by the majority consuming countries, and that it hopefully the idea, of course, is that we don't want it to be continually defined by these majority consuming countries and then imposed, on origin. And so there's a lot of questions in the chat of how do we make sure that coffee producing communities are really a part of the conversation? What does that look like? How do we make sure that the CVA is being used in such a way that inspires those questions, right? And it's not just another tool for the majority consuming countries to define what what value means, right? What quality means, what all these things mean. There's questions in here about how do we approach contracting to be more more equitable? How do we quantify the true cost of production? So there's, of course, I think we could all speak to this for minutes on end. I think the broad takeaway for me is that there's no easy answer to this. But what I would like to do now is just thank all of the panelists. This recording will also be available on our YouTube channel and on Coffee Knowledge Hub. And we will also attempt to answer some of the remaining questions. We've took screenshots of them through a newsletter when we share with you the recording, and just thank everyone for being here. So we'll get back to you. And again, I just want to thank the panelists for being here, for all of our attendees for being here. Thank you to Coffee Knowledge Hub for co-hosting this with us. And yeah, I hope to see you all again soon in some other events. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.